In the world of trading, there's going to be some people that come up and help define what trading is. Recently, I've had the chance to interview someone whose reputation precedes them, a true mastermind in the world of algorithmic trading, Robert Pardo. As founder and president of Pardo Capital, he has been at the forefront of trading for more than 3 decades. He is also the author of the book called The Valuation and Optimization of Trading Strategies, which is a cornerstone read for traders worldwide. His contributions just don't lie in his text, though. He has also contributed to implementing an analysis called a walk-forward analysis that is used by many professionals today. He has a keen sense of finding robust trading strategies, and he is here today to share his insights, lessons, and stories that has shaped his remarkable journey. So please enjoy the video, and thank you for watching.
I've been kind of involved with working with different aspects of trading for before I got involved with doing software. So I worked. I don't know if you know who Salomon Brothers were, but Salomon Brothers were like the only competitor of Goldman Sachs back in those days. They were I was my last job was with Salomon Brothers, and I used to help with arbitrage for John Merriweather, who was the principal and founder of Long-Term Capital Management, which maybe you may have heard about that. They were they were a very big. John was considered to be one of the best bond traders in the world, so we were responsible for doing his arbitrage in the T-bill pit. So and then my one of my the founder of my one of the guys that helped me found my business originally was a T-bill pit trader, order filler. So I've been kind of around this for much of my work. I've been around this almost all my work career, and so that was, and I knew these guys did very well. The first guys that I worked for were cattle traders, and they did extremely well. And then I learned. Well, I didn't really learn much about trading, in all honesty, from those guys. What I did learn was that most guys who trade on the floor are actually you probably, it may seem odd to call them risk averse, but they're kind of used. They always had, most guys who traded on the floor had what they would consider to be some kind of edge, and they didn't ever have to take very much risk to trade the way they traded. So I kind of saw how these guys traded, and it really didn't have a lot to do with the way my stuff developed, but it was something I was always aware of.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm wondering, do you know any profitable floor traders that are still around today?
No, I shouldn't say, I didn't like the guys that I knew. I don't think a lot of them are really involved anymore. I know one of our neighbors in our old town was there were a couple guys that were extremely successful T-bond traders. They're not really, and I know the one guy, he was one of the biggest T-bond traders in the pit, and he
Mm.
really did not. He was never able to convert to off the floor trading. Well, a lot of the guys who were floor traders could not successfully transfer over to what they called trading off of a screen.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to a lot of the guys some of the guys that were very successful floor traders were the ones that were actually that became they became like they developed prop trading firms. And I know one of the guys he was also a bond trader who he was a customer of mine when I first with my first early software. He was one of the first to actually create a prop trading firm. So that's where a lot of those guys went. All the market making, because the floor traders, they weren't formal market makers the way they are in the stock market. Um, but they did make the market. And unlike in stocks, there was no real prohibition against trading for yourself if you were filling orders.
Mm-hmm.
And so so a lot of those guys actually became a lot of the prop trading firms actually kind of do they actually, instead of actually really trading the way you and I would think about trading, they actually were more like, they would make markets. and a lot of the prop trading firms actually are market making firms. I mean, one of the guys that I'm more acquainted with nowadays, he was a big fan of my book, Walk Forward Analysis. He created some very some testing a pet testing platform that runs in R, and his primary focus really is market making.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so
Yeah.
so when exactly did you get involved in systematic trading, and how did you know systematic trading was right?
That just by accident. No, I'll go further into that. I worked for a guy who had a brokerage firm. I was his assistant, and it was kind of an interesting story. He he was extremely the guy was extremely difficult. He was extremely temperamental, and he was like almost impossible to work for.
Uh,
And he wasn't even a good trader. He was basically a guy who made money off commissions. He was a lousy trader. He couldn't make a living as a trader. He had a very wealthy wife, and I think that had a lot to do with what I think that's how he lived and supported his business. But anyway, he fired the whole sales staff one day and said, "Bob, go clean out their desks and see what they left in their desks and stuff." So he just said, "Get out of here." And I wasn't there, but they kind of like when I walked in, it was like a ghost. There was nobody in the trading room anymore. So I was going through the desks, and I found a copy of Perry Kaufman's first edition of trading systems and methods. I thought,
oh,
what's this? So I started reading it, and because I had before I read the book, I mean I knew there were people who were actually using micrcomputers because that's what they called them in those days, to create what people would call numbers. And my partner in my business wanted me to create numbers, for his because he wanted to give them to his customers as an incentive to be with let him fill their orders. So I was kind of getting interested in that whole thing because I stopped working for this guy and went off to work for my own business, and and I saw this book and I thought this is really interesting. So I started working through it, and saw some really interesting stuff and started figuring out it wasn't in those days people used to actually sell trading systems, and what
mm-hmm.
they would not you people nowadays wouldn't would they'd see what they're offering and they would laugh at them, but they would basically they'd write up a system, and some of them actually were some were decent, some were garbage, but
Mm-hmm.
and they'd sell them for $3,000, which is now worth about $3,000 back then was worth about 15,000 now.
Ooh.
So anyway, there was a so I realized that why would you have to take a guy's word for it? He says it's profitable, but who the hell how does he really know?
Mm.
And like so I figured it wouldn't be that hard to figure out, now that there were microcomputers, figuring out how to actually code up a system and then test it historically. So I was one of the first. I mean, I don't know if I was one of the first guys that ever did that, but I certainly, well, I don't know. I don't think I was the first guy that ever did it, but I certainly was among some of the first guys that ever actually tested systems with a computer. And I spent a great deal of time just testing trading ideas that I had, or that I read in Perry's book, or that I saw elsewhere that people talked about here and there. And I began to realize, even though a lot of the stuff that people sold in terms of a $3,000 strategy was trash, there were some worthwhile ideas out there. So and that just kind of led one thing just kind of led to another.
Oh wow.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So how did you discover walk forward analysis?
Well, I had at that point, at that time, when at the time of its creation, we were marketing a product which was one of the very first sophisticated products that could actually let you build a strategy and trade a strategy. It was called Swing Trader.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually came about, it was actually kind of inspired by a collaboration with a guy who it was aware of kind of like a pattern-based trading system, and the system that he was aware of wasn't so great, but that we took pieces out of it that were actually very good and assembled some of the other pieces. And so that with Swing Trader, you could actually make strategies with different rules in them. There was like rules for trend line breaks and peak and valley breaks, and there was an overbought rule, oversold rule. It actually now has become sort of like part of the furniture of trading strategy. And then we had another rule in there, which is actually that was in a similar sentiment, but it was more, we've expressed it now in Ranger as a volatility range breakout. And it's actually still it's still a very good rule. In Ranger, it's not exactly the way we did it in Swing Trader, but it's similar, and it's actually very good. We built, even though we don't use them yet, we built systems with Ranger with this rule. So anyway, let's not get sidetracked on that. But we had a customer who actually, because I would talk to a lot of the customers, and we had a customer who was actually doing very well using Swing Trader, trading it on T-bonds. And the Swing Trader was built on an Apple II, which and an Apple II, if it was maxed out, had 64K of memory, which nowadays seems like just an absolute laughable number.
Yeah.
But that's what it had. So we had we used to store data on floppy drives, because the hard drives were not available until the actual PC came out. But they were not available for a long time so you really couldn't save much data, and you actually couldn't load much data. So part of the thing was, we realized that what this guy was doing was essentially doing like a real-time walk forward. He would actually, he told me he would actually, because we had a very involved process for building strategies with Swing Trader, which was, it would drive anybody in this day and age. It would drive people insane to do it, but he did it manually, and he did very well with it. And he would look back for about a year of data, build it, then trade it for a week, and then start all over again next weekend. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And then we also realized that there were some real issues, because data, the markets weren't. I don't know if anybody's actually done a study of this. I doubt that the markets had anywhere near the kind of volatility they have now then, because there just weren't that many people. There were nowhere near the number of people trading them to produce the kind of volatility and liquidity that we have now. But I realized that there were some. I realized there were some people. There was a restriction, only being able to look back about a year or two of data. Sometimes caused issues with some of the signals that traded less frequently. So I thought, well, what can we do? And then I thought about this guy with his starting anew every week. I thought, well, let's look at that. And so we started doing walk forward analysis by hand. And at that point in time, we also had a business. I had lent my name and strategies to a money management business, which actually ultimately became Pardo Capital. But I was not really involved with building the strategies, as that may sound to you. But I had a customer who had built some really good strategies, and they were working so we were managing money with his strategies, and they worked for a while, but then they just stopped working. So I explained to him how he had to do this, doing walk forward analysis manually, and he was just too lazy to do it. So that basically wound up that money management business simply folded, because he wouldn't build a strategy that had any legs. So we then got it in mind to actually build, because we realized it's a lot of work to do it manually. So we actually thought, well, let's just build it into the software. And so we built it into the software. And the stuff we did with walk forward analysis back then is still more sophisticated than what people do now. And we're actually beginning to rebuild that into another version of our app. But people have never really risen to the occasion of actually doing walk forward analysis the way we originally did it, and analyzed it. But that's what actually we had a program. The first program that actually came out that actually did walk forward analysis was a program which we call Blast, which later became XT, and the strategy we built with Blast back in the early 90s became the algorithm that we use. One of the algorithms we built back in the 90s with Blast became the algorithm we used in the XT99 Diversify program.
Oh, wow. So on the topic of the walk forward analysis, so you described that you're doing walk forward analysis more sophisticated than what most people are doing now. Can you explain that more? Like, what metrics are you looking at, and how do you select the appropriate walk forward for your lifetime trading?
Well, that's proprietary. But what really has to happen is, and if people, I don't know if people actually really understand this or not, but like when you use the walk forward optimizer in TradeStation or enhanced walk forward optimizer, you ultimately are, don't get me wrong, doing a walk forward analysis with the walk forward optimizer or enhanced walk forward optimizer is still infinitely better than not doing it at all. Infinitely better. But it is still ultimately subject to picking the best parameter set in each individual optimization, in each individual walk forward. Does it make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it becomes subject to that. And whereas some of these tools do have some overlays as to what's supposed to happen in an individual walk forward in terms of rejecting it, they don't really go right to the heart of it, which is actually picking the most robust strategy, the most robust parameter set in that optimization. And people also didn't realize that when we built walk forward analysis, you could choose to not trade in any particular walk forward. People really don't. That's not possible. I don't think that's possible in any of the walk forward optimizers that exist now. So ultimately, just because you have a good strategy, it doesn't mean you can have a great strategy. It can be robust. You can walk forward very nicely, but there's no guarantee that every individual window is really going to be a tradable optimization.
Mm-hmm.
And that people don't. That's one of the things we also did. Early on we realized that there can be windows you should not trade forward.
Mm-hmm.
So those are a couple things, and one of the things they also don't do in the walk forward optimizers is they don't really deal with what happens if you have a hangover trade. So if on the boundary, if you've built a strategy, you're trading it for a length of time, and the window comes to the out of sample window comes to its natural end based upon the walk forward parameters. I don't really. We're trying to figure out what we've never really quite figured it out what they actually really do with those trades. But depending if you trade but there's a couple ways you can actually handle those trades that cross the border, and I don't think most of the walk forward optimizers really let you choose which way you want to do it. My friend Murray Ruggiero, who's he actually passed away a year ago, surprisingly, because he was a pretty young guy. He built walk forward analysis in Trader Studio to my specification, and he lets you choose what you want to do with those border trades, but the other ones really don't do that.
Oh, wow. Wow, so that's a lot for. I did not know that the walk forward analysis was. I measure things a little differently than maybe what you do, but I do not think the TradeStation walk forward analysis is really sufficient either. Like you say, I think
You know,
there's much better approaches to doing a better walk forward analysis. So on to the next question. So since the release of the evaluation and optimization of trading strategies second edition, have you modified or added any steps to your factory process? Are there any new tools or techniques that you now incorporate into your approach?
well, I have enhanced it, and we embody those in our Ranger Maker, and the Pardo proprietary development process. But it involves it involves looking at more than one walk forward. And one of the things that I've realized, that I realized when you do a walk forward analysis, you can do, some people, some actual so-called experts, in strategy development actually confuse walk forward analysis with simply doing one individual walk forward.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you're going to if doing one walk forward is better than doing no walk forward, but walk forward analysis is multiple walk forwards.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we found within that whole process, is that, you can still have because of the way a lot of these tools handle the data. You can actually, if you're looking at a long walk forward and you're looking at a range, then, and when you want to compare it to a short walk forward, or a walk forward that has a much shorter look back, like let's say you're looking at a 6 year in out of sample trading, for example, for 1 year in an out of sample window.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at a small data sample, you're really only going to have a couple of walk forwards. And again, it's better than none, but it's way better to have a walk forward where you have, say, 15 or 20 walk forwards, because then if you're looking at a walk forward analysis like that, and some of them, I don't think that any of them really let you actually measure this way, but one of the things, it's like in crude had such big moves, back in 8 and 9, that, doing testing with data that includes those, sometimes you can actually make so much money, in 8 and 9, and lose money for 4 or 5 years and still be way ahead of the game. So, analyzing the robustness of the walk forward analysis has become an important consideration, the way we do it now.
Okay. So I know you say it's proprietary, but can you give any examples or of how to measure how to determine if a walk forward is robust?
Well, a couple things to look at are kind of just common sense, although people, I think, don't do it anyway. But, one of the things is you really want to have, the number of actual walk forwards out of the total number, the proportion of profitable walk forwards out of the total number of walk forwards is an important measurement. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the distribution of the profit is actually, that's important. You really don't want to see, you don't want to see 3/4 of the profit being in one walk forward. That's kind of like having one big winning trade in an optimization. You don't really
Mm-hmm.
want that. Um, that's kind of an important consideration. What will be some of the other obvious things? The Let's put it this way: the slope of the P&L in a walk forward, is important. I talked about this in my book, in terms of picking, parameters, and I'm always been amazed that people for the most part really have not really picked up on it. But you can have a situation where um, you can have a 45-degree trend line for your equity curve, and or going up into the current time, or you can have a 45-degree trend line going down, from the past into the future, and they both have the same. Well, it's not going to have the same angle if you measure it correctly, but, it's you can still be profitable. You can have the ladder kind of trend line slope in your walk forward analysis, and if it's made enough money, like you talked about crude in the past, you can still the walk forward can still look like it passed. So those are a few of the things you really that are really helpful to look at.
Mm. So, what makes the Ranger Maker an effective tool for trading, and why would you recommend it?
Well, Ranger Maker, Ranger Maker automates Ranger Maker automates the the, the optimizations which you have to start with when you're doing it when you're developing strategies. We look at a very large universe of different because you can have so many different kinds of strategies in Ranger. So we look at a universe of 128 classes of strategies, and within those classes, we look at 32. I think it's 32 classes of strategies, and within there we look at either 6 or 3 variations within those particular strategy classes. So we're looking at like 128 combinations. So originally Ranger did that with workspaces, which you had to set up manually and save the data manually. Ranger Maker completely automates that. So all you have to do is run one Ranger Maker process, and it'll run all those different optimizations and store all the data. So that's one thing. There's a more advanced aspect of Ranger Maker, which we call COFA, which basically runs a cluster analysis and a walk forward analysis matrix with using the COFA application running the enhanced walk forward optimizer.
Oh, wow.
And it also develops a report that summarizes all the ones that essentially passed COFA and then passed the walk forward analysis matrix.
Oh, wow.
So it's a gigantic time saver. Plus, Ranger Maker also works with enhanced, reduced versions of Ranger, so they're anywhere from 2 to 4 times faster than the native version of Ranger. I mean, Ranger is a big program, and we found the hard way that there's no way you can actually make a long program run any faster in TradeStation other than reducing the size of the code. So we call them the Rangerettes. So they're actually they're much smaller versions of Ranger, which because they're smaller run a whole lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean it's a huge time saver.
That is huge.
And plus one of the things you can also do is you've discovered you can actually create different you can create different XML processes. So for example, I discovered something a while back that really intrigued me about Ranger. We actually had run some programs we ran the original Ranger alpha strategies for years, and they were very profitable. A couple of them really had some big drawdowns. A couple of them didn't have any significant drawdowns at all. But I realized that there are some switches in Ranger which kind of look obscure or like they might not really matter very much, but they matter a lot. So I built a Ranger Maker XML that explored all of these different options, and the net result is that some of these strategies that were like one of the ones that really took a hit, although it's come back in the original Ranger Alpha, was a counter trend strategy, and with a couple of these changes, that strategy looks like night and it doesn't even look like the same strategy in terms of the equity curve. So and for example, we have found that developing risk stops and targets for a strategy, whereas it would seem like a relatively trivial thing to do, it's anything but trivial. And so we're building an XML process in Ranger Maker to explore a whole universe targets and risk stops, so we can determine which ones are most appropriate. And one of the things, sometimes, for example, some of the strategies we use in the new Ranger Alpha use dollar targets and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And and they do actually they do extremely well. So I shouldn't poo-poo it. But something like a volatility target is much more adaptive to different conditions. So we're looking at this. We're using this new XML to look at a broad universe of targets and risk stops. And part of it is we want to I kind of classify risk stop and target stops in terms of long term, intermediate term, and fast. And then within those ranges, we have different kinds of risks and targets. So, doing all that stuff manually, it can be done, but it's time consuming and a lot of work. So
it is.
So Ranger Maker makes all that stuff. So anything plus there are things in Ranger we haven't even looked at yet. So we have some very interesting filters in there that we're looking at these next. But using, and for example, you can use the XML to explore these kind of filters much more easily. And we have like a new version of Ranger that's going to be coming out within a month or two, which is way, way, way faster than what we currently have and super automated. So that makes it possible to look at all these things in one big batch and sort it all out. So ultimately, Ranger Maker automates a lot of hard work. It makes it possible to explore, really big universes of other kinds of alternatives in Ranger.
Oh, yeah. So, Perry Kaufman, are there any other people that you would recommend somebody to emulate other than you?
Well, Paul, in terms of, because I saw that question before, and I was thinking about people you talk. One of the great traders is Paul Tudor. I would certainly he's certainly somebody you want to study and emulate as best you can. In terms of even though it sounds a little hackneyed, Larry Williams is I've known him for years, and he's a very honest guy. He's a good trader, and he's a good educator. He's somebody that would certainly be worth paying attention to. I personally think that anybody who really wants to, I think part of the thing is, I don't really know how many people really are doing, I just don't, when it comes to people actually, coming up with, trading ideas and strategies, I don't really know how many people really, there's a lot of emulation in the hedge fund space. I mean, unfortunately, they're a lot like they really do kind of run a little bit in a herd. Mm-hmm. And those guys are basically very heavily involved with a so-called financial engineering, and really what it boils down to is they really do a lot of arbitrage. They do a lot of arbitrage. So and of course, one of the great hedge funds is Paul Simons. His stuff is he's certainly somebody you want to pay attention to. And so I think those might be the ones that might be, it's, the guy at Bridgewater, he's great, but their way of trading is so unlike what any individual can really do, that I don't think is he's certainly worth knowing about. But you really don't want, you really can't, the average guy just can't do what those guys do. Mm-hmm.
What do you say? What do you say to people that are very dedicated to trading? What do you think it takes a certain unique individual to perform well, or is it just the amount of dedication, effort?
No, it takes a certain temperament. Most
Mm-hmm.
people are very, you know, the temperament of a trader. You, you know, it takes a certain temperament. You have to be decisive. Most people are very, very indecisive. You have to be decisive. You to a certain extent, you know, you have to have like this. I saw somebody refer to it as having the memory of a goldfish because they can't remember anything for more than 10 seconds. But when it comes to when it comes to you know, being able to over recover from losses, a lot of people have a really hard time with that. So you can't when you're going to trade, you're going to have losses, period.
Yeah.
And even though I've been watching this stuff for years and years and years, sometimes it still bothers me because I'd like to have every trade be a winner, but that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen. So at least not yet. But you know, that's so the self-discipline, being being decisive, not letting your losses get in your way.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be you if you're a lot of people really have a lot of I think a lot of people have a lot of fear, period. And a lot of people, when they get involved with trading, their fear of looking foolish, their fear of being wrong,
Mm-hmm.
their fear of losing money, their fear of getting wiped out, they let their fear get the better of them. That's not really you can't if you can't be a master of if you're going to be consumed by fear, it's never going to work for you in trading.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, sometimes people, I mean, I guess sometimes people who there are some people I think who actually can let fear help them, but I don't think it's generally it's not a good not a good component. Being excessively greedy. This is they always talk about fear and greed. I mean, fear makes you not want to put a trade on, and
Mm-hmm.
greed makes you want to get out of a trade too soon. I remember a story when I was a broker years ago, years and years ago. I had a client who was actually a very he was Taiwanese and he was extremely sharp mathematically. He was extremely sharp anyway, but he's very, very sharp mathematically.
Mm-hmm.
And he was where he was trading. And I remember I don't know, we had a couple of trades where he just basically, I recommended a place to get out of a trade. And he said, now let's hang on. Let's wait for a little bit longer. Let's wait for a little bit longer. And instead of taking a loss that might have been like $1,000, it was like $3,000 or $4,000. And then so then we get into another trade, and it was it was making money, and he had like maybe $800 profit in the trade. And this we were trading lumber, and markets didn't move in those days like they do now. So
Mm-hmm.
$800 was actually not a bad profit. And he I said, this is not his name was Eric. I said, Eric, this is let's hang on for a while. This is too soon. And of course he got out of it, and of course it went a whole lot higher. So this whole thing about fear and greed, people talk about it all the time, but it's a huge factor, and you have to have you can't let them get if you let them get the better of you, there's no way you're ever going to be a successful trader.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the question really of being committed and being willing to live through being willing to live through drawdowns and so forth, having confidence in your strategy. um, you really have to all these things all of these things are go into making for a successful trader. And I remember years ago watching a video of watching Paul Tudor trade. He used to have a tape called Trader, and I think it's long been pulled off the market because he didn't like it being out there. But and this is how a lot of floor traders he had a floor trader mentality, and he wanted to get long a market, and I don't even remember what it was, but he wanted to get long a market, and he basically he kept on he get in. He didn't like the way the market acted, so he get out with a very, very small loss. And I think he had 4 or 5 losses like that before he actually wound up getting into a trade that he kept getting into it and having it move the way he wanted to have it move. And then of course I think it went into a nice trade. But if you can't figure out, because you've indicated this early on, and that's very very observant. You have if your strategy doesn't suit your temperament, you're never going to be able to stick with it when things don't go when things go into a drawdown. So this is the thing. All of these things are essential to success in trading. And commitment, dedication, courage, all of this stuff. And most people just don't have that kind of character makeup.
Yeah.
To the end of the video, please remember to hit that like and subscribe button. It'll be much appreciated. And thank you for watching.